iCloud. No.
So what do we know about Hanukkah? Give us a shot, Tony.
Real quick. Okay. It can be viewed in several ways. Number one, there's three aspects. One, you could sort of look at it as a war of liberation of the Jewish people from the Syrian Greeks. However, if you look at it a little more, you can look at it as the elimination of Hellenistic influences on the Jewish religion. What they were trying to do, it was not just by the way, it was sort of almost like a civil war part of it, in that a number of the Jewish peoples decide they like the idea of the Hellenistic philosophies and stuff. And the Greeks were trying to, I'm using that word generically, were trying to influence the Jewish religion, where they would incorporate, where they would discontinue certain facets, okay? And then the final part of the story, okay, is the miracle of the oil. When they when they were able to drive the Greeks out of the temple, they found that there was only one day of oil left in order to keep the ceremonies going, and that one day lasted for 8 days. And I'm trying to be brief. That's what I have to say about it.
Who else has pieces to add there? That was like great, and I'm gonna build off of that very soon. But what else do we know about Hanukkah? Don't be shy.
8 nights.
8 nights. Holly, you had your hand raised. Yeah.
We celebrate by cooking with oil.
Sure.
Latkes are delicious.
Yeah.
The Judah Maccabee, and I'm sure that's what Tony you were talking about. And the oh, Janice is coming in. She hasn't been here before, I don't think, but she's been watching the videos. And that, yeah, like you said, there was a fighting people. People fighting. What's that saying? They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat.
Sure.
So another one of those examples.
So let's take a step back. And first of all, anybody even have any idea when this took place? Give us a time period. What's that?
A long time ago.
But what does that mean?
2000 BCE.
2000 BCE?
Like
No, that's like 4,000 years ago. That's before even Abraham.
Right.
To the first temple period.
Right.
First or second.
About 200. It was about. It occurred about 200 in the 200 BC.
So about 160. Let's give or take 5-10 years. Let's say about 160 BC.
Yes,
That's around the time of it's around the time of the Second Temple.
Yes.
And for context, it's about 200 years before Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah, so Jesus actually existed, right? Nobody denies that this person was not, right? So this is right in the middle of the Second Temple era. So there's if you, to take a step further back, right? David is the one who sets the foundation for the temple. Solomon builds the first temple in Jerusalem. It lasts for about 410 years. And the Israelites go into exile into Persia, and then they come back and they build a temple. They rebuild the temple, and everything is going hunky-dory. We can elide that historical bit for a little bit. We won't have to get into that yet. But around the year 160, things come to a head, right? The Israelites are always a minority in their own land even. Right. There's very little time when they have self-rule. And this comes at a time when the Seleucid Greeks, which are, in other words, they're Greeks, they're from the Greek idea of Hellenism and how Hellenism spread. But these are Greeks that were, these are Syrians that are influenced and have been taken over by Hellenic ideas. So we refer to as Seleucid Greeks. They come roughly from the space, from the period where the geographic area where we refer to now as modern day Syria. And they have power, and they have a remarkable amount of influence on the provinces that we now see as Israel, on the people who are living in and around the Second Temple. And they're not interested in converting anybody. They're not interested in murdering anybody. They're just interested in getting people to understand and to appreciate and to change and convert towards their culture, right? So they're looking for a cultural shift towards Hellenism. A lot of Jews are really attracted by this, right? And we can tell, like, we understand in today's day and age the value and the allure of assimilation. We see it all around us. And assimilation isn't just from Judaism to a more dominant culture. It's from any culture to a more dominant culture. How often do we recognize that it's better or it's more interesting to assimilate into greater American society than to maintain whatever it is that from, whatever country people come from, whatever cultures people come from and want to be part of and want to maintain. And there's a desire to say, you know what, I may come from Nigeria, but I've moved to America and Whataburger is fabulous. And I want to, actively, take part in that. And I want to be part of Christmas because everybody else is doing it. And so Israel, there's a lot of Israelites, there's a lot of Jews that are doing this, that are really assimilating. And then what happens then is a culture war, but also a very big military war. Right, the Israelites fight back, led by Judah Maccabee and his family. The Maccabees are a family. They're a family of priests. They're a family of leaders in the community. They push back against this Hellenism. They push back at a cultural level and they push back at a military level. And both parts of it win. And this uprising firmly ensconces the Jewish community back into a Jewish tradition for quite a while. Of course, by the time of the end of the Second Temple era, this is already after the death of Jesus, you start seeing that there's a lot more fractures within the Jewish community. But at this point in time, there is, this real reclaiming of Jewish tradition, because of what happened with Judah Maccabee and this idea of this fight and this push back towards traditionalism. Now, we have to take a step back and recognize that that's not the story that we're always used to hearing when it comes to the Hanukkah story. That if we've heard this story, it's mainly about, they tried to kill us, we won, and let's eat. And here, it's not necessarily they tried to kill us. It's that there was this natural force towards assimilation, towards Hellenization, that got pushed back. And that got pushed back, like I said, with a very strong military fight and with a very strong cultural fight. And the fascinating thing is that the rededication of the temple is what we are celebrating. We're celebrating the fact that the Israelites reconsecrated the temple. They got control of the temple again and they reconsecrated it, and we have an 8-day festival. Now, here is where there's a really fascinating divergence, because there's a book called the Book of Maccabees, which is an apocryphal book, not as in apocryphal as in it doesn't exist, but it's part of the Apocrypha, which means that it is not a canonized book of the Hebrew scripture, but is an accepted book that we know was written at the time, right, contemporaneously with that time. And the Book of Maccabees talks about the holiday of Hanukkah. And then the next time you see the book of the story of Hanukkah mentioned is in the Talmud, which is almost 500 to 700 years after, right, the Book of Maccabees having been written. Now, the Talmud, which is one of the major works of Judaism, is the main source where we talk about what happened with Hanukkah and the story of Hanukkah. And the story of Hanukkah, as it's mentioned in the Talmud, is this famous story that we have, that they reconsecrated the temple. And one of the things that happens in the temple is that the menorah is there, right? The candelabra, the 7-branch candelabra, and they had to light it. And the thing that is required to light the candelabra is what? You need pure olive oil. and pure olive oil that has not been tainted in any way, and they couldn't find any untainted olive oil throughout the temple until they found one small cruse of olive oil, enough to last for one night, for one day's worth of lighting. And they said, well, light it anyways while we have to go up north and go to the olive orchards and squeeze some olives to get some oil to bring it back to Jerusalem so that we can light. It might take a little while. And so they light this candelabra with the one last bit of olive oil that they are able to find. And miraculously, it lasts for 8 nights, which is enough time that it takes to get more fresh, pure, untainted olive oil to come back to the temple, and then they light it again. The book of Maccabees says nothing about this. The book of Maccabees points out that one of the things that they missed out on when the temple was defiled by the Greeks, right, by the Hellenists, was the holiday of Sukkot, right, which we had a couple months ago. And the holiday of Sukkot was missed completely. And there's 8 days of festivals, right, with all the sacrifices that we have. And what is the thing that they decide to do? They say, you know what? We missed out on having Sukkot 2 months ago. Let us have Sukkot again, right, as a second chance. That is the way that Hanukkah is mentioned in the book of Maccabees, which is a book that is a lot more contemporary to the episode that had happened than that. And that the only reason why we celebrate, and it makes no mention of this miracle of oil, right? And the only reason why we celebrate for 8 days is because Sukkot is 8 days, and they had a reconsecration of the temple, a rededication of the temple, and that was an 8-day festival. And so we have an 8-day festival, and that is in and of itself the basis for Hanukkah. The miracle of oil only shows up as a story hundreds of years later, and I'm not going to say that it's not true. But I have to be honest and fair and show that this is the spectrum of thinking. And I'll send out links in the morning in the chat of if you look at, there's so many accounts of the Hanukkah story online, and whether you read it from Chabad versus reading it from reformedjudaism.org or My Jewish Learning or Vox, right? You have different combinations of these stories or different accounts, all taking from these different things. Chabad's not going to mention, right, the basic military victory, and they're not going to mention the idea that there was Sukkot, and that's really where it's about. But Reform Judaism is going to sort of mention the other pieces and say, but at the end of the day, we know that this story, because they want to be historically accurate. I'm not going to tell people what to believe. I just want people to know that that is the spectrum of various ideas around where Hanukkah comes from. And the reason why we light is in commemoration of either this rededication of the temple or in memory of the 8-day holiday, right? That because there was a miracle where the oil lasted 7 days longer than it should have. And so we light, a menorah for 8 nights. Questions? First of all, whose mind is blown by this? A little bit, huh? Who's heard this before? Anybody's heard this before? Anthony, Augustine. So it's not to say that those stories aren't true or that the miracle of oil wasn't true necessarily. It's that there has to be an acknowledgement that a big part of the holiday is about just a plain rededication around this Sukkot holiday that they tried to rededicate. And there's nothing wrong with believing that. And there's also nothing wrong with believing that and realizing that there could have been a miracle of oil also, that they could have, had this while they were trying to rededicate 8 days in the temple for Sukkot. They're well, the oil's not stopping to burn, so that's an amazing thing, and we're going to have this festival. And as a result, every year we remember Hanukkah, we remember the original battle that we've had and that we prevailed, and we light candles every night, and we increase the candles a little bit every night. The first night we light one, and the second night we light two, and the third night we light three, and so on and so forth until the eighth night when we light 8 candles, and we put them in the window because we believe that we are supposed to publicize this miracle and publicize the fact that, as Jews, we are still here, and we are proud of it, and we want to do good to the world, and we want to, sort of literally be a light onto the world in this way, and put our Hanukkah our menorah in the windows, right? I don't know if you heard that. So the term for a 7-branch candelabra is a menorah. Now, because on Hanukkah we need 8 lights plus the 1 extra light, it's actually referred to not as a menorah because that's just a 7-branch candelabra. So the modern Hebraists renamed it and called it a Chanukiah, right? A Hanukkah candelabra. And so at the basic level, the only real requirement of what one has to do, and until fairly recently, Hanukkah was a fairly uncomplicated, simple holiday where you just lit a Hanukkah candles at night and then you were done. And that's it. But lately, because of the proximity between Hanukkah and other winter holidays, Hanukkah has had an outsized role in contemporary society, to the point that there are now this year multiple Hanukkah movies being made for the Hallmark Channel. Yes, it is true. And we celebrate it, and we have all this stuff. So much of what we have attached to Hanukkah has no real basis in traditional original practice. That doesn't mean that it's wrong and you shouldn't do it. But we have to acknowledge and take that step back and sort of say, as adults, right, there's no source for dreidel in the whole story of Hanukkah. Right, dreidel is a 12th century German game that gets picked up and smushed into the Hanukkah story and Hanukkah in general, and doesn't mean that you shouldn't play dreidel with your kids, because it could be fun, and we attach it to Hanukkah in a nice little way, right? But at the end of the day, the story around the dreidel it's made up, right? The story that they would study Torah in the caves, and even though they weren't allowed to study Torah, and so they had little dreidels, they had little tops that they would give the kids, so that when the inspectors would come and make sure that they're not doing anything Jewish and they're not studying Torah, the kids would just pull out their tops and put away their books and play, and they would say, no, we're not studying anything, we're playing games, we have these little tops, right? It has nothing to do with that, right? It has to do with, like I said, we don't have the dreidels show up in any of our literature until the 13th century. Right, it's a medieval Western European German game that gets glommed onto Hanukkah. I still think that those the blank dreidels that we gave you in the little kits, we should totally color them and have fun with them and play with them and recognize that that's part of the Hanukkah thing that we do today. It's okay, right? As adults, you can know that it's made up. As kids, there's a lot of things that we tell kids, right? About Santa, about the Tooth Fairy, and they will learn eventually about other things about Judaism. In the meantime, dreidels are what kids play on Hanukkah, and that's fine. So enjoy that. But the basic thing is that we, take a Hanukkah menorah. I know we gave you guys candles. Menorahs can be bought anywhere from $1 to $50,000 on Amazon. You can not $50,000 on Amazon, but there's all sorts of numbers. And sort of, I think we wanted to leave you guys with the ability to select your own menorah for the family. We've got handfuls. The kids make them all the time. The most basic thing you can do is just make one yourself and just have something where you can line up 8 candles in a row plus 1 larger candle on the side to use to light it. And we use the what we refer to as the shamash, right? The thing in which we use, and the shamash literally means, right, the server, the caretaker, right? The one that serves the others. And the shamash is the candle that you use to light the other candles. And we don't want to extinguish it. And so on the first night, you take 1 candle and you light 1 candle with it. And then the second night you take that one candle and you light 2 candles with it. And the third night you take, and we do that every night until we filled up all 8 nights of the candles. And you have the blessings, which I can send out a link to in the chat in the morning. With the blessings that we do, it's 2 blessings all the nights, except for the first night when you do 3 blessings, because you have the Shechianu blessing, because you haven't done this holiday in a whole year. And so we make this Shechianu thanking us for this newness of this new time. And that's the basic practice of Hanukkah. Everything else flows out of like custom and ideas. So why do we eat, right, oily foods? Why do we eat foods with oil, Zach? You were the one that brought up the foods cooked in oil.
To remember the oil lasting for 8 days, just to honor that, if it happened or not.
And that's why we deep fry stuff in enough oil to last us for 8 days, right?
Yes. Your cholesterol should be raised for 8 days.
Exactly. To eightfold, right? You should have your HDL numbers go 8 times through the roof. Yeah, and so people have lots of customs to eat foods with oily, bases, right? So Sephardic and Middle Eastern Jews have the custom of doing donuts because they didn't have access to tons of potatoes, and the Eastern European Jews didn't have access to tons of sugar and flour, and so they make potato latkes, potato pancakes. I've seen all sorts of other interesting things. The most creative and the most interesting thing that I'd seen was that people will do like a really interesting, if you have a gathering of adults on Hanukkah and you don't want to just devolve into like, deep fried madness, which there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to, up your game a bit, have an olive oil tasting. Right? Go online and order some really cool, really nice, fancy, flavorful olive oils, get some nice bread, and just taste some interesting olive oils and have fun with that. Right? It's very much in the spirit of that, but it's an elevated way to think about that. Last year, because I was doing a lot of cocktail workshops around Hanukkah, there's a technique called fat washing. I don't know if anybody's in the cocktail or the alcohol world, where you can take fats, whether it's like bacon fat and infusing it into bourbon, or all sorts of other fats and flavorful peanut butter into like whiskey and stuff like that. So what they'll do is they'll take fats and dissolve it or like mix it into an alcohol, like a bourbon or a whiskey or something like that. But then if you freeze it, the fats will solidify, but the alcohol won't. And so you can then separate out the fat, and the flavor of the fat gets left behind, and the fats you can pull out because you don't want that in your cocktail. And then you then have a peanut butter infused whiskey or a bacon fat infused bourbon or whatever you want to do. And so I did an olive oil infused whiskey, which I then made into like old fashioned cocktails in Manhattans, which was a lot of fun. So like finding the right olive oil that made it work. So that was a great way to like take that Hanukkah idea of like oil and put it into a cocktail. Because otherwise you wouldn't otherwise think about having oil in a cocktail. But that was fun. That was a different thing. So like oil, the idea of remembering these things, these are all great ideas, right? But it really got me thinking, all of this like stuff, because the one thing that I'll add before we get into this bit is that there really is no source for gifts on Hanukkah. I'm sorry, I'm going to be the Grinch on this one. I'm actually writing an op-ed that's about to be published in the next few days on this. Like there is no source whatsoever for Hanukkah gifts at all. It really comes from the fact that Christians were giving out gifts around Christmas time. Hanukkah comes up, and let's put them all together. And I was like, well, what are you going to replace that to make it interesting? And how do we like do something interesting for kids around Hanukkah time other than just dreidel, which is, if you're past the age of 6, it's fun for 15 minutes, but then you're done and you got 7 more nights and 3 more hours to entertain. And what are you going to do? And so I started asking myself, like, what are the things in which, like, how do we ascribe any sort of anything interesting or any sort of values to Hanukkah and to what Hanukkah represents. And I started realizing that, like, oh, let's think about the values of Hanukkah, and let's figure out what we can do with them as people, as families, to incorporate them into our family life and to use that to like bring Hanukkah forward. So family, I'm going to go through a couple of things to sort of start thinking about a new way to approach Hanukkah and a new way to bring Hanukkah into our families, into our own lives. Family, I think, is a very big value in and around Hanukkah because first of all, we have this family of Maccabees that decided to like take this on and rebel, but we are connected in holidays to our families. If we care about history, if we care about this idea of ourselves as a people, we should be connected to family in some meaningful way. And so I think that like taking a microcosm of that and thinking about the things that we do around Thanksgiving, which is to me the ultimate American family holiday, right? Especially secular. How do we bring that into the Hanukkah like life? And I think it's really interesting. And if you can, think about your extended family, whether via Zoom or in person, and try to connect one of these two things, right? Whether it's the Shabbat candles or the Havdalah candle with the Hanukkah candles, right? Because we have one Shabbat that comes through every single Hanukkah, right? Because it's 8 days. There's going to be a Shabbat that goes through any given Hanukkah. And ask yourself, how do I take this moment, which is a classically understood idea, right? This idea of like family comes around the Shabbat candles or comes around Havdalah the way that we did it. And how do we invite family to like join us virtually or in person to sort of say, well, we're going to do Shabbat this year around Hanukkah, and we're going to light the Shabbat candles and we're going to light the Hanukkah candles. Actually, you light the Hanukkah candles first and then you light the Shabbat candles. And then when you do Havdalah, you actually do it in the reverse. You first do Havdalah and then you do the Hanukkah candles. Because when you light the Shabbat candles, you're in Shabbat and you don't want to have to light the Hanukkah candles because you're already doing Shabbat. So I invite you to sort of take that one night of Shabbat and sort of say, how do I bring my family, Jewish or not, old or young, and how do I say, well, this year, or this is a week in the year when we're doing Shabbat, but we're also doing this Hanukkah and candles, and Hanukkah candles remind us of this history and the family that we have and the ancestors that we have and the descendants that we are going to have, and we'd like to invite everybody in and be part of that. Again, whether in person or by Zoom, and sort of saying, can we all light Hanukkah candles together and then go into lighting Shabbat candles? So that's like an interesting way to start thinking about family and Hanukkah. How do you extend the lighting of Hanukkah candles to other family by adding them in and including them? One of the things I always like to think about when it comes to Hanukkah is pride, right? What makes somebody like Judah Maccabee want to fight on behalf of anti-assimilationist ideas? It's pride in Judaism and being able to say that I'm standing up and I'm proud for the Judaism that I believe in. I'm proud of what it represents. I am, doing this because I believe in. Did that work? My sound went out? No? Okay, I'm good. Somebody tried to call me. And that pride, the most basic manifestation of that pride is when we take the Hanukkah candles and we put them in the window, right? We're proud of our Hanukkah, we're proud of our Judaism, and we display it when we are putting that candle in the window. So that's, a beautiful moment, but that's one moment. What happens if you flip that around and you say, where else can I see Hanukkah candles? Where else can I go and feel proud of the fact that a lot of other people are doing this on this night? I've done this in the past. I've encouraged other people to do this in the past. Go find a Jewish neighborhood or a neighborhood where you're going to find a lot of other Hanukkah candles in the windows and drive by and look for how many Hanukkah candles in how many homes you can actually see, that is a great moment of pride to be able to say, we live in a country where 10, 20, 30, 40 other people that I can pass by will actually have Hanukkah candles going. So that's another activity, right? Activity 2 for night 2. In what you can think about and what you can do to move and make Hanukkah feel like more than just about gifts, right? It's about this connection to the larger community. And to extend that a little bit more in another value, right? The value of peoplehood, right? And not just pride and the ability that that you're pride, this idea that like we are part of a Judaism that is way beyond just our little neighborhoods. So it's one thing to go and look for a neighborhood that is celebrating Hanukkah in another part of San Antonio where you can find 10, 20, 30 other Hanukkah candles. It's a totally other thing to be able to go online. And this is really only something we've been able to do recently. Go online and find a Jewish community in a place where you would have never imagined that is celebrating Hanukkah, and join their synagogue, or just go and look and see how are they doing Hanukkah in South Africa? How are they doing Hanukkah in Australia? It blew my mind. I remember when I heard about this and it hit me because of like, they're in the different side of the world, right? So in Australia, Hanukkah is celebrated in summer camp. Yeah, whoa, that's crazy, right? So finding other communities and seeing how they celebrate, whether it's different song tunes for the blessings, whether it's different. And by the way, Mary Ellen, I will find you the sheet music and I'll send that along in the chat for Hanukkah, for the blessings and stuff like that. And there's definitely YouTube videos that will help people learn how to do the blessings. But let's use this opportunity of Hanukkah to look for global Jewish communities and seeing how they celebrate Hanukkah and what they're doing within their communities. It's an opportunity for us to feel this sense of peoplehood, this sense that our community is way beyond just the community that we live in, right? We're connected as Jews to this global community, and everybody does Hanukkah in their own unique way, and that there's something really fascinating about that. Hanukkah to me is also about generosity in a big way, right? It was about this idea that it wasn't enough to fight for something. It was fighting for something real. And part of that reality was we were not a selfish people. We're not people that were trying to be Greek and Hellenist in the way in which it was about culture and it was about the person and the individual. Judaism really had this push towards collectivism, at least in the time and the way in which we would understand it, was, something that we like to highlight and to welcome. And at the basic level, again, it's one thing to light our Hanukkah candles in the window and to point out that we are a light to the others. It's something else to go and tell our families and tell our children and tell ourselves, you know what? I don't think it's enough to just put our light in the window. I want to go out and be a light, right, in the community, right? I don't want to just illuminate the community from my house. I want to illuminate the community with my own actions. And I always encourage people to take one night of Hanukkah and go volunteer somewhere, right? Go find a homeless shelter, go find, a soup kitchen, go find something in which you can do something and you can go out there in the community and you can say, it's not just enough that my physical light, right, is metaphorically like in the window so that the community gets lit. I want to show my children that we believe in lighting with ourselves. And that spirit of generosity should be there also. We're not done yet. Got a lot of other values that I think Hanukkah represents. I just need 7 more of those and I'll be nice and lit. Yeah, you got it. What is Hanukkah but tradition, right? Tradition. Find and collect family artifacts that you may have or start creating family artifacts that you may have that relate to Hanukkah. Right. If you don't have recipes and traditions, this is your chance to go and start those traditions for your children, for your grandchildren, and be conscious about it and be able to say, if Hanukkah is about tradition, Hanukkah is about this idea that we are, a particularist people. We have these families. We believe in the sense of history that we come from and where we're going, right? Let's take Hanukkah and use that to be thoughtful about what that looks like for the future, right? To take the past and bring it to the future, or to say we are creating the future now with all our years, and to be thoughtful and conscious about it. Imagine if you have a chance to create a Hanukkah scrapbook of like various memories from Hanukkah's past, but you get to start it this year. And you get to say, this is what we did Hanukkah 2021. And next year is when you add a couple more pages when you do Hanukkah of 2022 and you move it forward, right? You can make these up completely out of whole cloth, and you get a chance to make up your own traditions. You can research them. There's a lot of material out there online about global Hanukkah customs. And so here's your chance to go and take Hanukkah and make it yourself, based on things that you read, that you found interesting, or things that you've decided to, like, we love lights. We're going to have flashlight, or glow stick dancing, right, for one night of Hanukkah, because that's like using light in a creative way. And that's going to become a family tradition that we're going to have on Hanukkah. This is your chance to either take older traditions, which may exist within your families, or to create them for yourselves. Yeah. All right. Got a few more. Right. When I think about this idea of rededication of the temple, I always sit and think about, you can't rededicate something unless it's holy, or unless you intend it or you think about it as holy. And so this value of sanctity is huge. And you'll see this a lot in traditional families, where they'll do something special with the space, and they'll say, well, you're not allowed to do anything with the light of the candles. And it's actually in one of the prayers that we do after the blessings. It says you're not allowed to make use of the blessing. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we have the shamash, right? Why we have that extra candle, is because there were people that were afraid that you might accidentally benefit from the light of these candles. And these light of these candles are special. They're holy. They're candles that were used for a mitzvah, and not just candles that were used for our pleasure and enjoyment. So by adding one extra candle, you can always just say that I'm benefiting from the extra candle and not from the other candles that are lit. Right? So that's one of the reasons given for why we have that shamash candle, why we leave it lit the whole time. But one of the things that I think, in order to make that a little more holistic and less technical and less weird, I always try to take the space, not just from a purely, fire safety concern, right? But what if we take that space where we light the Hanukkah candles and make it a sacred space, and sort of remind ourselves and remind our children that this is a special space. These are special candles, and we should look at them with a certain amount of awe, and cultivate that awe that we were talking about at Rosh Hashanah, and cultivate that in our homes, and to say, well, these candles are sacred, right? There's a special holiness while these candles are there, and you can enjoy it. But make that time that the candles, so it's both the space and the time during which the candles are burning, find something special and meaningful and momentous to do during that time, so that the time when the candles are burning is always a time and a moment when something is special is happening. Yeah. So it's not just, right, we light the candles and we're going to go off to dinner, we're going to go do our thing, we're going to go to Whataburger and eat some Texas toast or whatever, right? Let's take that time. It could be a half an hour, however long your candles that you have. I insist, I get these oil cups because I like using oil for lighting my Hanukkah candles. And I get the biggest ones that I can imagine and that I could ever find. And like, I've had candles like still lit the next morning after, going to sleep. And then the candle, you wake up at like 6:30 to take the kids to school, and there's still a little bit of like flame going off on a few of these cups because you put a good 3-4 ounces of oil in there and they're just going and going. So you don't have to make the entire time sacred, but if you have candles and they're going to last a half or an hour or an hour, like find something special to do with the family during that time to make it feel like, well, as long as the candles are burning, right, we have to make that and treat that time as something special. And that space is something special. So the idea of like incorporating sanctity and the idea and the value of sanctity in your family by using the Hanukkah candles as this like lens on that or as a tool is an absolutely amazing and an exceptional way to get that going. And I'll take 2 smaller ones that are both very much part of Hanukkah, but we can have fun with them. One is tolerance, right? If we really understood the value of, the one thing that the Hellenists didn't have was tolerance for other traditions and other faiths. Even though we had it took us a military battle or multiple battles to like win back our independence. I think that especially in the 21st century, the idea of recognizing that other people have other traditions and that they're valuable and interesting, right, is a value that I like to pull out of Hanukkah as a result of knowing that Hanukkah was about a cultural struggle. And so I think it's important to be able to talk about joy and appreciation as a Hanukkah value, to talk about the joy and appreciation that we have for other cultures in our culture, whether it's the dominant culture or other minority cultures that are happening within where we are now, is an important thing. My kids and their kids of 2 rabbis, the thing that they love, and remember, this is no fake Texas lights, right? Where there's no snow and there's no like real like feeling of Christmas, right? My kids love driving through the streets in December and looking for Christmas lights. And I can tell you, Christmas lights in a town where it's cold and there's a lot of snow takes on a very, very different vibe, and they think it looks beautiful. And to me, that's a Hanukkah value, is to be able to say, that's not our religion, that's not our tradition, that's not what we have done, but it's beautiful to go around the neighborhood and look for beautiful Christmas lights. And it's appreciating, and it's being able to say that we have a value of tolerance, right? We tolerate and we think that it's wonderful that other people have different religious traditions because we want them to express the same thing about ourselves, about us. And so that to me is a Hanukkah value that we should take a moment and take another night to go and say, we're Jewish, we just lit our Hanukkah candles. We don't want to leave them unattended. Let's be safe, right? But after they're gone, right, let's go for a drive with kids and say, hey, let's look for other religions. Let's say it's not our religion, but that's okay because that's still beautiful. And we can go and look at that and appreciate it. So, and that's just one way in which we can cultivate tolerance, right? I always say that the other way that you can do it, if you don't want to go out and look for lights or look for other religions, is play a board game. And recognize that there's, especially nowadays, a lot of board games where nobody wins, right? There's no winner and no specific loser, right? That it's this like cooperative. Settlers of Catan is a great example, right? You have this really cooperative sense of a board game. Play a board game and insist that, like, we have this sense of what does it mean to be tolerant of each other by playing these games, by artificially, bringing in this value. Sorry, I keep banging the table and it keeps shaking this. We're done. Okay. And the last thing that I think is important to think about when it comes to Hanukkah is who these original military fighters were. And it takes a lot of courage to be that person. It takes a lot of courage to be a good Jew in society today. And what better way to like instill courage than trying a new food? Right? I know it sounds little and like silly, but like to little kids, trying a new food is a big deal. And it's a big way of being able to say, look, they had courage, right? What does it mean to have courage? Well, tonight we're going to try sushi, or we're going to try Thai food, or we're going to like whatever it is that you can help them feel courageous and say, now you know what it feels like to be courageous, or to find a new activity, right? I have here like skiing, right? There's no skiing in Texas, is there?
Just water skiing.
Yeah, exactly. No. Ice skating. No, Texas ice skating. Outdoors. No. But finding
80 degrees today.
it's what was it?
It was 80 degrees today.
80 degrees today. It was 38, I think, was at the high today. So yeah. We're expecting snow in the next 48 hours. I put on the snow tires. It's mandatory to put on snow tires in Quebec. By December 1st, it doesn't matter if there's snow on the ground or not, if you do not have snow tires, you can get a $600 fine. And it's cumulative. You can get it. And then if you're caught with the tires not on yet, again, a week later, they'll give you another $600 fine. They'll just keep going. And people get them all the time because it's the law, because snow tires prevent accidents in the winter. So everybody here has snow tires. I put on snow tires today, and yeah, it is what it is. So none of this 80 degrees business for us. But find a new activity. Find a new thing that pushes ourselves or our children out of that comfort zone. And there's value and importance to that. And that reminds us that Hanukkah has this notion of courage attached to it also because of this story. So notice that here's 8 amazing activities that have nothing to do with getting gifts, that have nothing to do with dreidel, that is much more and deeper than just lighting the Hanukkah candles, that we can all do to incorporate some real deep Jewish values into our families without having to think about gifts and just lighting candles and moving on and being mindless about it. I've spoken for a long time. Any questions, anything that I didn't cover yet, any ideas that you still want clarified? Anybody want to share anything based on anything that I just mentioned? Please.
I'm excited to do I want to do the scrapbook or like the memory book now.
Yeah, getting it started.
This is Lucian's first Hanukkah, so we have a couple books. We got our PJ library book in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and we always do latkes.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll get some more food.
There you
Family food traditions now that we're not kids.
My latke tip, by the way, is use egg yolks and not egg whites.
My dad's trick is cornstarch, which I'm not 100% sold on.
Interesting. So to add a little bit of like
It
body
gets them
to
a
it.
little crispier.
So yeah. So if you use egg yolks, egg whites make things cakier, right? When you want a really cakey, beautiful crumb in your cakes, you use egg whites only, or use extra egg whites in your cakes. And egg yolks make things crispier. So if you use only egg yolks rather than egg yolks and egg whites, like whole eggs, you will inevitably end up with a crispier latke.
Do you
So
have
that's
to like multiply the amount of eggs? So like if I
yeah. If it
2
tells you to
eggs,
use 4 eggs, so use 8 egg whites, right? Egg yolks,
Okay.
because you got to get that same volume.
okay.
Roughly. I mean, you'll play with it, but egg yolks make things crispier. That's just the chemistry behind it. And so I leave out all the egg whites and just use egg yolks for my latkes.
It's also increasing the cholesterol, and it's the good cholesterol.
Sure.
So you could use that, right?
The other thing you can do is if you pour salt, and I may take a chunk of like carrot, either or, and put it in your fry oil, it'll actually keep your it'll gather all of the like impurities, like all the leftover bits from whatever you're frying. It'll actually gather them together, and you'll still end up with a pretty clean oil for frying throughout the whole process. So it's not like halfway through your latkes end up being really like gross tasting because you have a lot of random floaties coming through. You're looking for things that will clump together all the like stuff that falls through at the end, by the end of it. That's my other tip. Those are my latke tips. But yeah, you're excited for that. Who else has interesting stuff they want us to mention or ask a question that I didn't answer yet? Nothing?
We didn't mention
We did
gelt.
Gelt. So
fun?
gelt, I think gelt really, and I've looked into this, gelt originates from the idea that kids were playing dreidel, right? And to play dreidel, you need some money. And so they would give kids like coins to play dreidel. And then that got because gelt literally just means money in Yiddish or German. And that got translated to chocolate coins, right, when chocolate coins became a thing. But that really guilt is associated in my mind or in my basic research with the dreidel game and has nothing really, again, but it's tough. It's tough to like not, and I'm writing an op-ed about this right now, and it's hard to like take away this idea of like gift giving, even though it has no like source in Judaism. It's hard to like go to little kids and say, yeah, we're not giving you gifts because we don't believe in it. And it feels like some weird fundamentalist Christian, like, you know, like we are not those people and we don't give gifts at Christmas time. And and like, so, you know, I joke, I don't give gifts, but my wife does. So like our kids know that, you know, Abba doesn't give gifts, dad doesn't believe in this, and they're old enough to hear it and to know this whole thing that there's no connection, but they know that they're still going to get a gift from mom.
You guys just do one gift?
So again, there's no like how many and what, and like, again, I try to stay out of the gift giving entirely because I really have a hard time with it because it has zero connection to the holiday. In past years, there have been multiple gifts, even though like there's one big one and a few small ones and stuff like that. I do believe this year we are doing like an end run around the entire thing. And because the kids are old enough and the youngest one is 8 and the oldest one is 12, there is going to be one very large family gift that everybody's going to get and everybody's going to share. I think they're asleep. I believe we're getting like an Oculus, like a VR headset, and the kids will just all have that one thing to share. It'll be one gift on one night for everybody to have, and it'll be the best $300 that we spent because there'll be no headaches and like, here, just do that, and then not have to worry about different nights and different gifts and different kids and stuff like that. So I think that's what's going to happen, but there's no right or wrong answer because there's no real source for it. So do whatever you want.
Can I add something that we did? I mean, it's
Please.
nothing great.
Yes.
We would do one night, we would do trinket night. So everybody knew they were
Yeah.
getting something like under $1. And then one night everybody had to give everybody else a gift.
Mhm.
So I don't know if we picked a name. Some years we picked names, some years everybody would make, you know, whatever. You make something, you go to Goodwill. When they got older, they would go to Goodwill and pick something out for their siblings. I've heard of other people doing different kind of things. Like one night, everybody, you pick something online for somebody else, like the giving, like you go and or you buy something and you're going to give it later to somebody. So you can do different themes each night too. So, and I tried to keep it small gifts. They wanted something every night. They liked that. So mostly small, mostly like $5 things, but it's hard to find. You have to start looking in like August and, pulling those things out. I had a big basket of stuff that I just collected. But you're right. I love that. I love all this. I think this is awesome to bring in these other aspects.
Values rather than gifts. And I like stuff. Don't get me wrong, right? I like stuff, but putting it in the context of bigger values is always important. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, ideas? Like I said, we're going to keep this going, I'm sure, in the chat for the next little while. And I can't wait to see Hanukkah pictures pop up in the chat every night, hopefully. But you guys all have your candles from your kit?
Yes.